Welcome to the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. On today's show, we're going to present ideas about how to talk to our spouse in terms of expressing anger, that specific emotion, which is a delicate one. Anger tends to be one of the most intense emotions that we can feel. In fact, it's so intense that oftentimes it can drown out other feelings or mask them, such as other feelings such as fear, embarrassment, resentment, disappointment, guilt, jealousy. So when I just react to my feelings in some way without really defining what is happening, that reaction really doesn't help the person I'm trying to deal with, because they don't know what I'm dealing with, which of these emotions is coming out, and all they see is anger. So by just going to anger without really understanding why I'm angry and another way of expressing that, I really close the door on understanding and problem solving with the person who means the most to me, my partner. Anger can be one of the most destructive emotions to a relationship, according to the research that has been done on this topic, especially if the anger tends to linger or is mismanaged, or if it turns to rage. Obviously, anger out of control can lead to violence and, in some serious cases, homicide. So, yeah, it's a reality, unfortunately. So when I'm in a relationship and I'm really focusing on the anger I feel toward my partner, I lose touch with the other feelings that I normally would have for her, and those feelings of caring, love, respect, joy and commitment that we normally can share now are drowned out by this anger. And so it deprives me of the very things I need to begin to work on that relationship and feel the good feelings again. But anger isn't all bad. I mean, there's a reason for it.
There's a purpose for it, and there are positive reasons that we feel it. It can foster change. You know, if everything just went along smoothly, things wouldn't always change. So it can manifest that there's been some injustice, that somebody hasn't been fair with you, that you have been your safety or your well-being has been threatened, and it's an alert. It tells us there's something wrong that we need to right. So it serves a purpose, and we need to pay attention to it.
It's a much better way of looking at anger, isn't it, than those other ones we described.
It's like an alarm bell going off.
Right.
Just like on a machine. It's like there's something wrong. What is wrong? It's how we manage it. Just like conflict. We've talked about conflict. We can't live without conflict. And so therefore we're going to inevitably bump and bruise each other, and we need to figure out how to manage that.
How to deal with it, sure.
Yeah. And it not only for our partnerships, but for all the people around us. Because if we don't manage it well, then we can misdirect it and be directing our anger towards people that we are not angry with just because we're bottled up with it, and it's going to find a way to express itself. Right. Even though I think we aren't well versed in it, because expressing anger is a taboo, and I certainly wasn't brought up with the permission to be angry.
And it usually isn't something that we teach. You don't go to school to learn how to deal with anger.
So what do you do with this?
So what are we supposed to do with this emotion?
You're supposed to bottle it up and be mature and deal with it, but you can't always, because it's telling you there's something wrong. Let's fix it.
So looking at it in that way, research has determined that there are basically two types of anger, and we have to think of it and define it in these two ways. The first way is what we call valid anger. And in valid anger, the situation that triggers the anger, any average person would respond in an angry way to this. That's how common it might be. The anger is justifiable given the situation. It's verifiable in the sense that if you check it out with the person, yes, this is what happened, or this is what that person said. And it usually breaks a norm for respectful behavior in some way. The other type of anger is called distorted anger. And this one is the troublemaker, because the source of the anger comes from assumptions that have not been verified. They're based on our own interpretation of events and are distorted, inaccurate, and as I said, just not verified.
It could be from just incomplete information again. The distortion may be coming from not having the whole picture. I think the terms are important, but I'd be careful not using like, this is valid anger, because any normal person would understand. That's kind of a clinician's viewpoint.
Well, it implies that one is okay and one is not. And whereas one is distorted and one can be verified.
Righteous, it's really not.
So let's look at some things as examples. Would be examples, say, of distorted anger. Blaming me for something I didn't do, and even when I can prove that I just didn't do that, I'm still not believed.
So the other person is distorted.
Right, they're invested in the anger with it rather than really listening to reality.
And not interested in the evidence that you have to offer.
Correct, yes. Another source of distorted anger is assuming in this situation that a cleaned up, orderly house, for example, means the same to me as what it might be to my wife.
Or any definition that could be misinterpreted, like timeliness, like
any value that one person has, assuming that the other partner
shares that
value and to the same degree. That can lead to distorted anger. Well, why don't you pick up, and why don't you do this thing and everything, and say, hey, things are fine the way they are, what's the problem?
Or even like healthy cooking. Like what you think is healthy and what I think is healthy might be two different things.
Correct.
And we could, having different assumptions.
So that can lead to some assumptions and distortion then. Another situation that might lead to distorted anger is if I were to come home from work, say, very frustrated and angry about what's going on at work, and to sort of unload on my wife, assuming that her day has been an easy one, that she wouldn't come anywhere close to having the kinds of frustrations that I have. Distorted thinking again. If my spouse were to blame me when our new car blew a transmission when I was driving it, and that would be distorted thinking with assumptions.
You specifically had done something to cause that when in fact it was not.
Another distorted thinking would be buying something inexpensive for myself, and my partner really gets very angry about it because it doesn't mean the same to her. So those are examples of anger that is distorted. It's not based on mutual values, mutual feelings, or talking something out, or as you say,
any kind of contract that you had, or an agreement that you had. It was
no agreement, anything.
Independent operations that just don't fit.
Right. And the other, let's take an example then of valid anger. You agreed to do something important to me, and you failed to do it. That can be a valid thing.
A broken promise.
Not paying attention to me when I'm talking to you, looking away, making comments, watching TV, something like that, can be a valid source of anger. If we made an agreement as a husband and wife or partners not to purchase anything over $300, say, without confronting or without contacting the other person and talking it over, and I go out and buy a $1,000 dining room set. That is a break of trust. Or at a social gathering, perhaps my wife starts to talk about me in personal terms that were more private to me, and it turned out to be somewhat embarrassing. Or maybe she invited her sister's family to come over and stay for a week with us and never consulted with me about this. And I really find that family difficult to deal with. So that's another way of valid anger. And another one would be, my wife told me that she was working late at work when actually she went out with the girls to a club to go drinking.
Why would you do that?
So that sort of kills the trust, to say the least.
So the common thread that I hear through this is either deceit, breaking a contract, outright not telling the truth.
Right. Or a norm.
Or a norm, yeah.
Yes. And distorted anger, unfortunately, is much more difficult to deal with because you have to deal with the distortion and you have to begin to help people to understand and trust that it is a distortion. It may be partially true, but not completely enough to warrant that anger. Whereas valid anger usually can lend itself to
testing,
correction,
and also
and
testing
validation.
by other means, like this seems reasonable to most people.
Exactly. So those are the two types that we can identify.
So what do we do when we think we're feeling angry? First off, recognize the physical messages that you're getting in your body. And this was not something that I was really well versed in ever. But you're going to get a physical feeling.
Yes.
You're going to recognize it and acknowledge that that's what's happening and identify it as anger. You talked earlier about anger being either masked or combined with other feelings. And I think it's easy to get confused or to back away and say, well, I'm just tired, or I'm sad, or I'm these other things, either to avoid saying I'm angry or because you can't pinpoint it. But try to understand that it's anger. Slow down in your reaction. Gives you time to think, gives you time to assess. It's really hard, but slowing down, walk away, think it over, plan your response, be thoughtful and mindful about it. Rate the degree. How angry am I? Is this a little angry or is this a lot angry? Where is it on the scale? Am I annoyed? Am I frustrated? Am I fit to be tied?
Almost like a thermometer.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
What's the intensity of this?
Yeah. What triggered this? What happened to bring this about? It's important because you're going to need to know that later because you may trace that back. The cause is something that you might be able to work on if you can figure out the trigger. And is my perception verifiable? This is where you could be talking about, am I making assumptions? Or is this like, am I right? Did we not agree to this? Or is it just my filter? And then what would it take for me to feel less angry or to have that anger repaired? Because again, when you go to address it, you're going to need to understand what caused it and what do I need.
And that's where you may find that need, if you define it, is what was linked to the anger.
Yeah.
So that's important to know.
So I've identified it, Tom. Now, how do I talk about it?
How do you express this now? Yes. So if you were expressing to a partner, you're picking...
Yeah, so I'm going to start not with criticism, not with judgment, and with a soft touch. So not harsh, not like full barrel, but okay, with restraint, I guess.
Well, and with skill, because if you...
I've thought about it, I've slowed myself down.
If you describe versus criticize.
This is what happened, this is how I felt, and I'm checking in with you, and am I wrong?
And avoiding the sarcasm that frequently can get in the way, because once the sarcasm is out there, everything else won't be heard.
And so I've labeled it, I've identified it, I've described it, and now I'm going to listen to see and to verify and respect and listen to my partner. This is where our reflective listening comes in.
This is the most critical thing in dealing with anger, is the listening.
Here, all right. So I've told you what my perspective was. How did you experience this? And now I'm going to listen without interrupting.
And we should mention too that before you start doing all these things, make sure that you pick a time to talk about this when both of you are okay with it.
Yeah.
Because,
not when you're in a hurry.
Yeah, if you insist, we're going to talk about this right now,
Yeah.
that act by itself is going to trigger some more
Right.
anger.
And you need some time and space for this to percolate. So again, it's kind of like when we've done some of our other things, like our iMessages, is like, I felt this when this happened. Could we try this? Could we agree to this? Would you be agreeable to doing this? How would you feel about if we did this?
And so important, again, that stage of negotiating comes after we've done all the listening.
The hard work,
Because if you try to go there before the person feels heard and understood, they're not going to be in a position to want to negotiate with you.
And you've got to understand what happened.
Yes. Yeah. Once they feel that you understand the source of their anger, they're more likely to say, okay, so what can we do about it?
Right. And then you can appreciate each other and say, I'm so glad that we're working on this. Even if it isn't done, you can appreciate the partnership.
Right.
This is important to me. Let's continue working on it.
And even getting very personal with it and saying, it means so much to me when you stopped what you were doing and you sat down and listened to what I had to say. That can go a long way for both parties to feel that bond of coming together again, which is what you want in a relationship. So, but how do you respond then if you're the one that is the anger is being
I think that's harder.
leveled at?
I think that's harder because it's one thing to get your courage up and your mind and all your strategies and your thoughtfulness to broach it with your partner. But to have the wherewithal and to be calm and to listen when somebody's telling you that you messed up, that's
Right.
really hard.
And I may feel blindsided by the whole thing, in the sense that I didn't expect this, or how can you say that? And before I know it, I'm in a defensive posture with it.
Because you feel terrible, or you don't agree.
Right. So make sure if your partner has come to you with something that he or she needs to express and they're angry about something, if you're not in a position emotionally, maybe you have a lot of fatigue, whatever, that may be a time when you say, I really do want to talk to you about this. I understand you're angry, but this is not the time for me. And postpone it.
But have a specific time.
Have a specific time,
And
yes.
I think it's also important to listen to what our bodies are saying when we're on the receiving end as well. We haven't emphasized that. But to be aware of how you're feeling. Are you feeling vulnerable? Are you feeling sad or guilty or threatened by this experience of talking about it too? Because
or the sudden onslaught of somebody saying something to you, and they go, whoa, I didn't expect that with it. So again, that can link up with other feelings very quickly. So if it's not a good time for someone to express this to you, identify that, and then give a time when you would be willing to listen. And again, reassure them that the relationship with them is important enough that you do want to listen. This just isn't the time with it. So once that's done, the listening, of course, is without interruption, and that's very difficult to do because when someone is talking about what makes them angry, especially if it's distorted anger, you want to get in and clarify that right away and say, no, that's not fair. That's not what really happened. And yet what they need to hear at first is just nothing. They need to hear you or see you listening to them and saying, okay, in this restatement that we've talked about before, now I'm understanding what you are so angry about. And it may not have happened that way at all, but this is what I'm understanding from you. That step by itself becomes healing with it. So you can go further with it too after the person has just sort of unloaded or almost vomited everything that they have to say with it. You can say, is there anything else about the situation that you need to share with me for me to understand? That really can take someone by surprise who's trying to express anger because you're saying you care about
I want to understand everything.
Yeah.
Tell me everything. And it's good to get it out because even the nuances, if they linger, are going to still resurface.
That's right.
Purge the whole thing.
So you ask for as much understanding, almost like if you can, play a detective game, almost detach from your own feelings and say,
So what?
tell me more about this. So once that is done, then you need to, of course, restate it and say, from what I'm hearing, this is what has made you so upset with me. And if you've hit it on the nail on the head, you can ask them very clearly, am I correct? Have I understood this? That, again, is a very healing effect. I've been heard. Someone wants to understand what I'm saying. So once that is done now we have to maybe clarify the distortions that might be there.
Right.
Or deal with the fact that, hey, you're right, I did do this, and you've got me. You know, I really did something wrong here.
I think what could be difficult is that if anger hasn't been addressed in a timely way, that the next time something similarly happens, that the triggering event can seem so small and so petty and so insignificant to one person, but it has a deeper meaning for the other person. And when we get into these two definitions of valid anger and distorted anger, it might appear to the other party that this is a complete distortion, but it is valid in that it is part of a series, or it's an accumulated thing.
Sort of gunny sacking or building baggage for something.
So
thus the importance when things start at a level on that thermometer of anger, at the lower level, to start talking, I'm annoyed by this, versus I'm furious with it.
Well, so, how many times when we sit with people who are coming apart, do they say, I wish that we could have learned how to talk with each other sooner?
Right.
You know, that.
And when we sort of trip that expression, communication that they're looking for, it's amazing what happens before our eyes with clients on that. So another thing you can do once you've asked for clarification and restated it is, what would you like me to do differently? Now you're inviting them to problem solve with you. And that invites them to get off of, you did this, you did that, you're to blame, and so forth, and say, oh, you want to know what might make a difference to me and what my need is in this.
Or how to repair it.
How to repair it, exactly. And then from there, go to negotiating. So this is, my point of view is this is what may have happened and what I saw and what I was feeling and everything. It sounds a little different from yours, but perhaps we can work together so that both of us are feeling okay about this. What would it take to do that? And you're inviting them to work with you. But sometimes they're right. You know, it's a valid source of anger, and now what do we do? So
you might have to apologize. Well, I don't even say have to. You might feel like you wish to apologize, and you should. We did a whole show on apologies, but an effective apology really needs to be voluntary. You need to acknowledge that you have done something wrong, and you have to feel legitimate, sincere remorse once you understand, once you've had this process.
And not backhandedly blame the other person. Oh, I'm
sorry
you feel that way.
I'm sorry that you, but like really take ownership. Okay, now I understand. I messed up. I was insensitive. I broke my promise, or whatever it is, and be specific.
Yes.
So you need to take, I need to take ownership of it. You're right. I did badly. Be specific about what it is so that I give that gift. It's a gift that you're giving the other person. I am sorry that I blank, blank, blank,
and
whatever.
If that's sometimes what happens is when someone says, I'm sorry, I did the following thing, and the other person says, that's not what I'm angry about.
So it's still an opportunity to clarify what the problem is.
Yes.
But so then you can also say, okay, I own it. This is what I did. This is the harm that I feel like I understand I inflicted. What can I do to repair that? What can I do to restore?
And then sort of ending
and then
with
say, I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity.
Right. A sense of appreciation for the other person, can go a long way.
Thanks for doing this journey with me through this misunderstanding. So.
And sometimes when we have done wrong, we need to, the other person has done wrong in our mind, and they own it, but the wrong was fairly serious.
Yeah.
We need to be able to get to a position of being able to forgive. And that's even more difficult at times. So why do we forgive? What is that about? And most of the time it's to benefit us as well as the other party, but to free ourselves of that chronic resentment and anger and bitterness that just gets in the way of all those other wonderful feelings that we could have that bond us in closeness with this person. If these bitterness feelings and hatred and so forth are in there, they're going to take more intensity and they're going to take more priority than others. It also shows that we're making a commitment to the other party to move on. Another thing that it does is it allows the other party to try to make up for some of this and to work toward that, because there's nothing worse than saying anytime something new comes up, but you did, remember when you did this and so forth.
Then you really haven't let go of it.
You haven't forgiven them,
But
yes.
maybe, again, going back to that apology, I think that these two things are so closely related.
Yes.
That if the apology is effective and sincere and well designed and appropriate, then it makes that next stage of forgiving
Much easier to forgive,
a little
yes.
easier. And as you said, it is a gift to ourselves, and it seems counterintuitive because you feel like if you're forgiving somebody, you're giving that to them. And to a certain extent you are, but you're really kind of removing that suffering and pain and negativity and the poison that comes with holding on to that from you.
And you're recommitting to the relationship, which allows you to start again or work again on more positive things with it. So it's future oriented. One of the things we note in mediation when people come in is that we're not so worried about what's happened in the past. We're worried about what do you want to do about this and how do you want to conduct yourself in the future?
Yeah.
What goals do you have?
But holding on to things is crippling, and I have done that.
Yeah. So some brief things that we could do to prevent things from escalating. What do we do?
So identify it when it's triggered, catch it before it escalates, get it when it's small, and talk about that trigger with your partner and decide how to handle the situation before it becomes so big and toxic that you can't handle it and you need help.
Even if you had a regular time in talking with the other person and say, we always take this time to say, is there anything that has happened that really angered you that I've done? Anything? So it's part of your
a routine.
built-in time.
Yeah. So then it's not so big and scary. You could just say, when we sit down to talk about our family, you can just have that routine.
Yes.
Like, what's good? What are we celebrating? What are we concerned about? And appreciate.
Right, that appreciation is so important with it.
And we have to do it more than the criticism, because
Right.
it's like, what do we determine? It's like a 1 to 5 ratio.
Yes,
there.
exactly.
You have to say 5 amazing, good, appreciative things.
5 statements of appreciation
to undo all
to
of the
1 statement of criticism or complaint.
Yeah.
Right.
So
That sort of brings us to the end of our discussion on anger with your spouse or partner. I hope you will join us again for our next show, which will be on how to teach our children to handle anger.